coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. It's coal. It was dug up by men and women who work and live in the electorates of those who sit on...
How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words.
Ultimately, the emergency climate comes down to a single number. The concentration of carbon in our atmosphere.
I'm a victim of this whole climate crisis, and I'm not ashamed to say so.
We would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation on whose lands we're recording today. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and recognise their continuing connection to the land and waters on which we live. Hi, I'm Samarine.
Hi, I'm Sandy.
And we will be speaking with Hubert Algie and Malvina Hagedorn today. Hubert is a Senior Associate at Norton Rose Fulbright Australia in the Planning and Environment Law team. He is the 2020 Marla Perlman Australian Young Environmental Lawyer of the Year. He has previously chaired the Environmental Issues Committee of the Law Institute of Victoria, and in 2016 he was awarded the Victorian Planning Environmental Law Association Young Professional of the Year. Since 2012, he has been invited annually to lecture the negotiation and mediation at Humboldt University in Berlin, as part of the joint Humboldt-Tulane University International Summer School on Alternative Dispute Resolution. Hubert is also a sessional tutor at Melbourne University in planning law and statutory planning. He has also been a clinic supervisor for the Monash Climate Justice Clinic from 2019.
And also joining Hubert, we also have Malvina. Malvina is a special counsel in Russell Kennedy's pro bono practice. She is a public interest lawyer with over 13 years of experience specializing in refugee, immigration, and citizenship law. Prior to joining Russell Kennedy in 2018, Malvina worked at the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre and Refugee Legal, and also as a protection officer for the Indonesian office of the UNCHCR. She has extensive experience in developing and presenting community legal education seminars. This includes working for Project Respect to design and deliver training on the Australian sex industry and human trafficking. Malvina has been involved in a number of high-profile strategic litigation cases. This includes the successful M70 M106 High Court challenge to the legality of the government's proposal to transfer 800 asylum seekers to Malaysia. More recently, she has been involved in a string of court actions seeking to bring refugees on Nauru and Manus Island to Australia for urgent medical assessment and treatment. Malvina has been seconded from Russell Kennedy lawyers to assist with clinical supervision for the Monash Climate Justice Clinic. She designed the reading and the seminar program for the clinic and has been involved since its conception.
I suppose begin by asking the question we pose to all our guests, which is what inspired each of you to pursue a career in the law, and how is it that you've ended up in the space of climate justice? We'll start with you, Malvina, if that's okay.
Sure, thanks for having me. What inspired me? Well, I was largely inspired really by sort of refugee issues to get into the law. So I was in my final year of high school around the time that Pauline Hanson was really getting a lot of traction politically because of her xenophobic views. And there was also widespread onshore detention of people who arrived in Australia by boat. So there was a lot of protests going on and people were going up to detention centres like Woomera in the middle of nowhere in central Australia to protest people being detained there indefinitely. And so I felt very strongly about those issues and felt that Australia was treating people in that situation absolutely horribly and wanted to do something about it. So that's kind of the context that I was in when I started studying my law degree. And I always wanted to do law to try to have some sort of social justice impact. And I wasn't sure I'd become a lawyer for most of my degree. Actually, I started studying an arts degree and then kind of got good marks in my first year and decided to transfer into law to do something more practical, because I remember at the time everyone was saying, what are you going to do with an arts degree? So I just thought, oh, okay, I'll do law just to see what happens. Yeah, and kind of felt that through my whole law degree, was really drawn to social justice slanted sort of subjects. And then towards the end of my law degree, I started volunteering at the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre and just fell in love with the work there, assisting people to put forward their protection claims. And so by the end of my degree, I thought I'm either going to be a refugee lawyer or I'm not going to do law. And so then I got lucky and got an articles, which back in my day was that year of practical legal training that you had to do prior to being admitted as a lawyer. I got that to do that at the ASRC. So I kind of just went straight into refugee law, which is what I wanted. So I felt very lucky to have gotten that opportunity. And yeah, I never looked back. I just loved the work. It felt really impactful, felt like a real privilege to be able to work with people who had undergone really horrific things in their lives, but were still able to, rebuild their lives and kind of show that level of resilience and help them try to navigate the legal system here in Australia, which can be a really challenging thing. So that's how I got into the law, I guess. And then how I got into climate justice there's a very obvious connection between the climate crisis that we face and refugee issues. So increasingly, climate change and the natural disasters that flow from climate change are displacing people. And people who are displaced as a result of climate change aren't actually recognised as refugees. So there's no provision made within the International Refugee Convention for people who are displaced as a result of climate change. So obviously we need a different answer for those people. And, more broadly, I think climate change and environmental destruction is, a bigger issue than or an all-encompassing issue, I should say, not bigger, but an all-encompassing issue that affects refugee flows really significantly. So that was my in. I sort of really I saw that as a huge issue facing people who I was working with and future refugees, and I wanted to do something about it. And I also just love nature. So it's kind of my go-to happy place that gives me a lot of joy and peace and really sort of nourishes me. And so I feel deep grief at the prospect of a lot of our beautiful natural places being destroyed. And so I really wanted to do something to try to stop that. And when I started working at Russell Kennedy about 5 years ago, they were actually in the process of discussing the possibility of setting up a climate justice clinic. At the time, it wasn't going to be in collaboration with Monash necessarily. It was just a student clinic aimed at trying to increase sort of the pool of ideas for climate justice litigation, because that was seen as a bit of a gap at the time. Things have really started moving since then in Australia, but at the time there was still not a whole lot of climate justice related litigation, other than, of course, sort of that bread and butter opposition to new fossil fuel projects. But outside of that, there wasn't a whole lot of other legal interventions going on. And then sort of without going into too much detail, got involved in that process, and eventually that led to the Climate Justice Clinic being established in collaboration with Monash as part of their clinical program. And I'm now seconded from Russell Kennedy to help supervise the clinic with Hubert every second clinical period, so usually a couple of times a year.
That's wonderful, and that sounds like such a rewarding path to where you are now. Love to hear from Hubert about the same thing. What inspired you career in law, and how did you end up in this climate justice space?
Well, largely by accident. I feel like I started out after high school doing a fine arts degree, like a painting degree. And through that experience, sort of felt I was more and more capable as a student. And within that educational context, I think I struggled a lot in high school, and it really knocked my confidence. And so doing a fine arts degree helped me realize that I could do further study. And around the time that I finished, I got a job in a planning and environment law firm, just a boutique firm, and got working, and felt that in the work of the law, I was much more at home in the sort of nuts and bolts of client meetings and conveyancing and file noting and managing a file than I was, than others were, maybe people that had got their law degree and that it was sort of brand new to them. So I felt at home in that way, and that encouraged me to go into studying law. And I studied law with a view of like, surely there'll be another area of law that I'm interested in more. Planning and environments, it's pretty niche. It's pretty sort of, it's not the glitzy law that is on, Ally McBeal or Suits or, all the criminal podcasts or anything like that. So I thought, oh, surely I'll end up in criminal law or commercial law or wheeling and dealing. And those areas will appeal to me more. But I found it was sort of like a process of deduction. As I went through and studied each unit, more and more those units were like less and less appealing. And it was sort of really helped me decide where I wanted to be. And the more I studied other areas of law, the more I realized that I enjoyed environmental and planning law, the more I realized the sort of uniqueness of that field. I think it's very rare maybe not very rare, but law is often looking backwards. It looks back to the harm that's been caused, the problem that happened, and looks to allocate blame. But I think with environment and planning law, often you're looking forward. You're looking at something that's new and growing and developing and aimed at improving the world around us. And I think that's really what kind of caught me and captured my imagination and allows that creativity to still be at work in everyday practice. It's also administrative law. I know it's a love-hate subject, but I think admin law is a really important part of practice and something that's at the core of planning and environmental law. And I think it's a really powerful tool to sort of hold government to account. And I think that's really exciting. Much like environment and planning, I sort of fell into climate justice as well. I think I was lucky enough to be approached in the second CP of the clinical period of the Climate Justice Clinic to, I think, start as a holiday cover was the sort of initial brief, and they haven't been able to shake me just yet. So I've been able to sort of hang in there for the last 3 or 4 years. So I fell into that space, and I think for me, climate justice in the clinic has been able to broaden the traditional scope of environment and planning law for me, where, say, Malvina's come from that refugee perspective, looking towards, the climate and its involvement in climate justice. I feel like it's climate justice has expanded what environment and planning should be looking like in practice for me as well. I think it probably does with every area, but yeah, so that's sort of how I fell into it.
So our next question is for Hubert. Could you start us, touching base on how you led to Monash Climate Justice Clinic? Could you tell us more a bit about the Monash Climate Justice Clinic and the legal services it provides?
Sure. The Monash Climate Justice Clinic is a pro bono legal service that works with a number of peak environmental and movement bodies, so protest organisations or peak advocacy groups and private organisations to advance climate justice in law and policy throughout Australia and throughout the region. One of the benefits of taking a climate justice view to the work we do is it really broadens the subject matters we deal with. It's not a traditional environmental law clinic. We're not limited to environmental issues. We really look at any issue that has a climate justice focus. So whether it's the right of protesters to be protected, whether it's traditional environmental disputes, whether it's defamation, whether it's any variety of kind of social justice issues connected to the climate, we're able to pick up and run with it. But look, I like to think about the clinic as an incubator. It incubates ideas that might otherwise not have the resources to be worked on. You know, often in the climate movement, organisations are pretty stretched for resources, time, energy. So the clinic provides this really important sort of stopgap for a lot of organisations where they've got a really cool idea that flows out of something that they're doing, but they don't have the people or the manpower to work on it. And that's where the clinic can come in, work with them over the 12-week clinical period, and hopefully deliver something that they can then use and run with.
That sounds so great. Thank you. And Malvina, can you tell us more about, the engaging reading and seminar program that you'd helped develop for the Climate Justice Clinic, types of resources available to enhance students' understandings of various justice issues?
Yeah, sure. I guess we sort of from the outset of the clinic, we thought it was really important to contextualize the practical legal work that the students were doing. So the way that we structured the clinic is that each student group, we usually have three groups of 3 students, and each of those groups works on 1 or 2 legal files of either research or advice for an environmental organisation or a partner body. But then in conjunction with that, we want to contextualise what the work they are doing is, what climate justice means, the fact that the law, for example, is only one tool in the climate justice movement can use to try to achieve its goals. And so to do that, we've designed sort of a complementary reading program that broadly looks at things like, what is this environmental crisis that we find ourselves in, from a very philosophical standpoint, in terms of looking at the various problems with our current power structures, with our current sort of patriarchal capitalist system, and that the fact that it's led to the crisis that we're in. Then we look at the role of the law within the climate justice movement, so how the law can be used in different ways to try to address climate justice issues. We importantly look at how crucial it is to try to incorporate First Nations knowledge and understanding into any response to climate issues. We also have a week on sort of mental health and well-being, so looking at the impact that climate change has on young people, anyone, but particularly young people, the psychological impact it can have, that it can often sort of feel really overwhelming and lead to apathy and people not really knowing what to do. And so looking at strategies that you can implement to alleviate those feelings and try to make you feel a bit more engaged and proactive and positive about possible strategies and solutions to climate change or the broader environmental crisis. Yeah, so that's just a little bit of a taster of the readings. There's other weeks that we cover other questions in. But in addition to the reading, we also have guest speakers, and that's it serves the same purpose. So we get speakers from across the environmental movement in Australia. So that's barristers, environmental campaigners, policy writers, lawyers, to speak about their experience and how they work to try to advance climate justice, the climate justice agenda.
That sounds really interesting. Thank you. So we'll open up the next question to either of you. So how does a clinical legal education, I guess you've already touched base on this, but how does it contribute to shaping young lawyers' understanding of climate justice as a broader social issue rather than just an environmental concern? So what skills does it help young lawyers to develop?
Well, I guess to dovetail on what Malvina's explained about the reading program, I think that's a really key part of the education around climate justice. You know, it's not a term that's maybe used as much or understood as well as others. And I think the first step is really looking to kind of provide those resources to students is the first step. I think expanding our understanding of what climate justice looks like, the way in which climate harm is felt most severely by those least able to respond to it. It's really important. And I think it really starts to open up students' minds to the variety of ways in which climate harm can be affecting the community, and the variety of ways in which young lawyers can be responding to climate. You don't have to be an environmental lawyer to care about and improve climate justice. You can do it in a variety of ways.
Yeah, and I think it also, so through exposure to our various guest speakers, we hope that also acts as an inspiration for students to see all the different things that they can do, the different sort of groups they could get involved in if they want to do something about environmental destruction, and gives them that real in. So sometimes I think that when you're at uni and you're really focused on your studies and, law can be really demanding, it can be hard to tap into the various opportunities that might exist. So we hope that the clinic does that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you mentioned the skills young lawyers develop. I think certainly for me, through my law school experience, one of the things that got me through it was mooting. I loved mooting. I loved the practical learning. I wouldn't have got through law school without it. And I think the clinical education program at Monash and clinical experience is such a fantastic opportunity, because it really is about the skills. So whether it's, researching, drafting, client interviewing, teamwork, working in an office environment, whatever the skills are that young people feel they're lacking, it really does provide an opportunity to work on those. And we at the Climate Justice Clinic really try and tailor the experience. So if you came to the clinic and really wanted to work on your advocacy, well, we'd look to find opportunities to help you build and develop those skills within the clinic as well.
That sounds great. Honestly, I want to join. I want to be a part of this.
We'd love to have you.
We'll open the next question to either of you as well. Many communities, especially those in vulnerable areas, face challenges accessing legal assistance to address the impacts of climate change. What are some of the barriers that these communities encounter in obtaining legal support? And are there any initiatives or strategies being implemented to address these issues?
Look, I think each community is different, so it's hard to generalize around the types of barriers that various communities face. It can often be just a lack of legal services in their area. It could be, the fact that they don't have financial means to pay for legal advice. And so they have to rely on a community legal service that is often overrun. It might be that there aren't actually legal solutions to their problems. So that's another big thing that we explore in the Climate Justice Clinic, is that often the law can't actually provide the solution that a person affected by climate change is wanting. And so that's where we also think it's really important to engage in what we call movement lawyering. And movement lawyering, I don't know if you've heard of that term before, but effectively means that you as a lawyer, you do what you can to support the existing environmental justice movement in Australia. So it might not be that you as a lawyer are providing some sort of silver bullet solution to an issue, but rather you're helping an NGO that is campaigning against fracking, for example, in the NT, and you're giving them legal advice to enable them to engage in that campaign. And so rather than thinking you're going to be the person to give the community a solution, you're facilitating the work that other groups are doing. And so I guess it's that kind of being that second step removed, which is really, really crucial work. And I think really important to realize how important that work is. I think people are often tempted or often think of sort of the law and climate justice as being these kind of high profile litigation cases that try to hold government to account or try to hold corporations to account. And that's absolutely one element of it. But there's a lot of other types of legal assistance that you can give to really assist communities that are being impacted by climate change.
Yeah. And, following on from that, I think we're seeing more and more in some ways, the limited return we're getting on litigation. litigation is often very issue specific. It's often very narrow. Sometimes it'll get resolved and negotiated settlements, and it doesn't provide solution for the whole community or the community at large, and it doesn't solve the climate justice issues. What this requires is action en masse, on scale, to actually address some of these concerns. And, when we talk about movement lawyering, it's really critical that we look at other ways in which lawyers can facilitate and empower change. So it's about empowering the community first and foremost. And so, really that's where we sort of find ourselves sitting, is listening to community and being driven by what their needs are.
And I think I'll just give you a practical example of how the clinic has kind of embodied that approach recently. So at the start of the year, we published a guide to land management law in Victoria, and that was in collaboration with Gippsland Community Legal Service. And it came out of Gippsland Community Legal Service approaching the clinic and saying, there's all these people in our community who were really adversely impacted by the 2019-2020 bushfires. They had a lot of damage to their property, or are worried that their property will be damaged in future fires because the land around their properties are being managed properly. And we really don't know how to advise them because this isn't an area of law that we usually practice in. Can you help us understand land management law in Victoria so that we can advise our community about what they are able to do, how they can maybe hold government bodies to account for poor land management or for a lack of land management? And so that's what we did. We put together a very comprehensive guide, which is actually now accessible online if anyone wants to look it up, to help the Gippsland lawyers and hopefully other community legal centres in Victoria as well be better placed to answer queries from their community.
That sounds like such amazing work. Thank you for talking about it. So our next question is for students who are wanting to get into the field. I'm personally interested into hearing your answer about this. So how do you manage your clients' expectations about legal outcomes while maintaining a positive mindset, given that legal services in general are limited by the law? So what strategies do you employ to avoid disillusionment and stay motivated in your work?
It's tricky. Look, I think the first thing is probably it's okay to be disillusioned at times. Like, it's not all rainbows and butterflies in legal practice. There are hard days, and even really fantastic days can be difficult and challenging. And, you really wear and feel the injustice of things that are going on around you. So that's kind of part of the work. I think it's really important, and certainly something the clinic looks to try and provide students is skills around sort of reflective practice, active management of your own mental health, and really trying to demonstrate that just as it is important to do your CPDs every year to keep up with the legal developments, it's just as important to be maintaining healthy lifestyle and healthy mental health practices in your work, whether that's seeing psychologists regularly, whether it's having somebody to debrief on the difficult things that you're dealing with. And I think that's probably the first step in being able to kind of manage all the slings and arrows that come in legal practice and all the difficult days. But overall, for me, I think really working with students at the clinic is just, it gives me immense hope, a difficult week where everything's, going south, or things are really difficult, to come into the clinic and have 9 students who are bright-eyed about the way the law is, the way it can work, and who are excited to learn and develop and grow is just, it's a fantastic sort of antidote to any of the difficulties that we come across in practice. But yeah, I'm lucky in that way.
All right, so in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. And yeah, question that's open for either one of you. Given that both of you took different paths to end up in the climate justice space, with Malvina having had that community legal centre experience and yourself, Hubert, coming from straight into private practice, what approach would you recommend that young lawyers take in getting involved in either environmental law, climate justice matters? Yeah.
Look, I think that I always tell students this, and I think that it's really important to follow your interest and your passion. And I don't think there's one way of getting sort of building a career that you're going to love. There's not one answer, but I do think as a general rule, if you stick to your interest areas and if you kind of try to seek out jobs that excite you and you feel passionate about, I think that's going to set you up pretty well into the future, because there are many ways of entering the climate justice space or social justice, or the social justice space in the law. Another great way, I think, if you're able to, and I do realize that not all students can do this, but I think volunteering for an organisation is a really great way of getting exposure to practical legal work, of building relationships within those organisations. Like, for example, within the community legal sector, a lot of recruitment is done from the existing volunteer pool. It's pretty obvious because it's the same as in private law firms. All the recruitment's done from people that have either clerked with the firm and then become law graduates. So it's a real chance for the organisation to effectively interview you when you are either volunteering or clerking, to then know whether or not to offer you a job. So it works both ways in terms of it's very beneficial for the student if you are volunteering, because you get to do great work. You see what it means to be a lawyer on the ground. You get an insight into what that particular organisation or CLC is doing. And then they also get to kind of see how you work and keep you in mind if there are jobs in the future.
Great, Hubert. Any insights?
Yeah, look, it's difficult. Job market's difficult. It's stressful for a lot of young lawyers. We're seeing more and more lawyers come into the profession. I think the thing that, just bums me out the most is seeing brilliant young law students feel like the measure of their success, their ability to be a good lawyer, their ability to have a fantastic career is measured by a firm's grad program. The hoops that get jumped over for young people to enter those programs are immense. And of course, they're great. If you could get in, it's fantastic. But the thing I worry about most is the students that miss out, despite being brilliant, despite being fantastic. It is not a measure of your success. Don't ever feel like that. If you don't get the grad program you want, or a grad program at all, or clerkships, I never got any of those. It does not matter. It is not a measure for your success. And to that end, I encourage law students to look more broadly. There's an immense, wide variety of legal practitioners out there. And I think a lot of young people do an immense disservice to themselves by overlooking those local firms that are doing good work, just down to earth, nuts and bolts legal work. They overlook that for the big city sort of firms. And I think they miss out on opportunity. They miss an opportunity to develop their networks, develop their skills. And I think they find themselves getting kind of turned away from the firms because they don't have experience. And I just think it's, I think it's a vicious cycle. And I think I'd encourage law students to get out and get an opportunity, and really, when you get those opportunities, run with them. Every opportunity is a potential referrer. They're a potential referee. There's somebody to help you in your career. So don't sort of go, oh, well, I can do better over here. You've got to treat people with kindness and respect along the way.
I think that's really reassuring for those who might be listening.
Yeah, that was so insightful and was also our final question for today. So thank you both so much for joining us and for all your words of advice to our listeners.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having us.